During the period of 1491 through 1607, Native American women were vital and respected in Native American life. The men only hunted, so everything else was left to the women to do. They were gatherers, builders, and weapon and tool makers. They were also responsible for making many other important crafts for Native American life, such as baskets, blankets, and pottery. Some were even medicine women who were responsible for the well-being of their tribe. Women during this time usually had no makeup on and wore their hair loose or braided. They had face paint on for ceremonial purposes and war purposes. They also wore headdresses according to their position or role in the tribe. Women during 1607 through 1783 were secondary to the men and were viewed as insubordinates in colonial society. Women had to fully respect and submit to the men. They had to help the men with the labor demands of the colonies as well. Women usually bore large numbers of children and didn't have any political standing. Because of this, women were usually tied to their husbands. They were also very religious and most adhered to the Puritan religion. Women during this time did not wear much makeup. Pale skin and pink cheeks were preferred. Their hair was usually pulled back into a bun and tied into a bonnet, making colonial work and labor much easier. During 1781 to 1877, the women's right movement was starting with Paulina Wright Davis and the Una magazine. It was during this time that the Seneca Falls Convention occurred in 1848. Women were becoming less content with the cult of domesticity that they had been in during the colonial times. During the Civil War, some women even pretended to be men to fight. Bonnets were no longer used, but hats became more popular. Hair was also more styled with ringlets and had more complex hairstyles, although it was usually still kept up. Pale skin, rosy cheeks, and pink lips were ideal. During 1877 to 1890, social classes were becoming more defined. Because of this, women wanted to show off their wealth and status in the new city environment. They were still very conservative, but was more relaxed than in the previous ages. Women were also escaping the cult of domesticity and were able to leave their house with their husbands. They also wanted to move their motherly roles from the home to social and political life. They did this by being the forerunners in the women's suffrage movement, the settlement house movement, and the temperance movement. The idea of the independent and active Gibson girl also emerged during this time. Wealthy women had neat, styled hair and wore hats and other accessories to show off their wealth and prosperity. If they were poor, they had practical hairstyles and naked faces as in the previous eras. During the Progressive Era from 1890 to 1920, women made major strides in their political standing. For example, they gave minimum wage and maximum hours for women, increased welfare for mothers and expecting mothers, as well as increased educational opportunities. Settlement houses were also becoming more popular for immigrants. During World War I, women became vital in the war and were more respected. Because of the absence of men, they were essential in the workplace. However, they still lacked equal rights with men. Most women still kept their hair up and out of the way as they had to work in factories, and the Gibson girl ideal was still very popular. One of the most influential inventions of 1919 to 1929 was the automobile. Because of this newfound freedom, youth culture changed drastically. Teenagers could suddenly go out with their friends and not be tied down to the home. Likewise, women were no longer confined to motherly roles, and they started to experiment with rebellious attitudes, fashion, makeup, and hair. The 19th Amendment was also passed in 1919, so it further encouraged a new age for women. Hair was cut into the popular bob, symbolizing women's transition from the conservative and restrictive past into the modern and daring present of the 20s. Makeup and other jewelry were commonly worn as a rejection of the previous era's Gibson girl and an introduction to the 20s flapper. After the crash of 1929 all the way to 1939, much of America was left in a destitute and poor state. Many men were off looking for jobs to support struggling families, leaving the women to stay and take care of the children. Women's roles in the home were expanded as they took on jobs that they would usually pay for. Eleanor Roosevelt perfectly sums up this idea by saying, "The women knew that life must go on and that the needs of life must be met, and it is their courage and determination which, time and again, have pulled us through the worst crises than the present one." Because women wanted to save as much money as possible, they didn't waste it on unnecessary luxuries like makeup. They often had unkept and unwashed hair with naked faces. The rich, on the other hand, still had the style of the Roaring Twenties, although it was a bit muted as they did have a decrease in income, but not as drastic as the lower classes did. Similar to World War I, the absence of men at home opened up job opportunities for women as riveters, radio operators, airplane pilots, and other wartime duties. In addition to working jobs domestically, many also served in the military, mainly as pilots and nurses. Rosie the Riveter also became a popular symbol of women empowerment and encouragement to join the workforce. After the Great Depression, the many new war jobs were not vacant for long. Although it was a little more home-focused, women during the Cold War still retained the same type of independence and pride. Women during the time of 1941 to 1959 still kept the short hairstyle that symbolized their independence. Makeup was also worn more commonly as magazines and television began to influence fashion. The increased prosperity of wartime also made it possible for women to afford cosmetics and hair products.
That's the drink that you don't pour. When you take one sip, you won't need any more.
During the period of 1963 to 1969 and the couple of years after, the feminist movement was really taking off because of the book The Feminine Mystique. This was due to the fact that women were becoming even more integrated into the workplace, even more so than in the previous eras. With this increased work, women became more dissatisfied with the unfairness in the workplace and started a fight for fair pay, better jobs, and end sexual harassment. At home, women also wanted to share the responsibility of childcare and housework and domestic violence and escape sexism. The approval of the birth control pill and the use of freedom trash cans helped to further the feminist movement. The National Organization for Women was also founded in 1966. Women during this time wore more makeup and had hair that imitated popular models and movie stars like Twiggy and Audrey Hepburn. Beehive hairstyles and shorter hair were very popular among women. Makeup in the early 1960s was very vivid and bright, but as the decade went on, it became more muted and natural. During the period of 1970 to 1979, the women's liberation movement continued to gain momentum. The Roe v. Wade decision in 1973 was a huge step in freeing women from sexism. The fight for the Equal Rights Amendment also occurred during this time, although it was not passed. Title IX was successful, though, and made sports and other athletic activity available to women in school. Women were also able to increase their education, and more women were able to go into higher education. And because of the explosion of feminism in the 60s, the 70s was greatly affected by the feminist movement. The hippie era of the 60s also influenced the style of the 70s. Women had big hair and bold makeup as they were more free to experiment with their style. From 1980 to 2000, women were becoming more and more integrated into society as a result of the feminist movement. Sexist laws were virtually gone, although some people, especially men, thought that women should still have traditional roles. There were and are still some inequality in the workplace, as women still earn 30% less than men. But compared to the previous eras of restriction and submission, women were able to live more fulfilling lives. They were able to hold part-time or full-time jobs, as well as have the same careers as men. They were able to do this because daycares and childcare facilities were readily available. Women were able to balance the responsibility of taking care of home life with the responsibility of a job. Makeup was more commonly worn as the media became increasingly influential in women's fashion. Hair during the 80s was big, curly, and incredibly teased. The 90s reflected today's style.